The Antique Wireless Association was formed in 1952. It's maintained a museum for many years, first in a location west of Rochester, New York. Then in 1958, this barn in the small town of Holcomb, New York, became the AWA Museum. This remained the museum until 1975, at which time the AWA moved into the nearby Bloomfield Academy building, a building erected in 1837. This former school building is now owned by the Bloomfield Historical Society of East Bloomfield, New York. As one ascends the stairs in the building, the first view will be that of this picture, which is titled The Golden Age of Entertainment. This is a very popular area. Here one sees old phonographs, early television sets, and early radios. Of interest to the far right is one of the very first broadcast transmitters still left intact. It was used at WTAG in Worcester, Massachusetts, and is dated about 1922. This 1922 Western Electric broadcast transmitter is all original equipment. Then there are the many old phonographs, some dating back to the turn of the century. The old Edison type with the cylinder records. Of great interest are the early television sets. And one can see at the lower left a 1929 Jenkins Nipco disc scanning type set. This has the revolving disc with holes in it. It was made in 1929 and was a commercially made receiver. It's in excellent condition and has a rather complex series of mirrors and lenses to make the picture. And right next to this television receiver is a color television scanner. This was a competitor to the RCA electrical color scanning system. It has a revolving disc with the 3 primary colors. And by the way, it's operational. Right behind the scanning disc is a DeForest radiophone, one of the very first broadcast transmitters made. It was made in 1920 by the DeForest Company, and one very similar was used at the pioneer station WWJ, which challenged KDKA. Now, as we move around the room, this next slide presents some showcases. There are many, many exhibits in this room, and one can spend many hours viewing them. However, let us dwell on one or two here. The showcase at the right is full of early Morse telegraph equipment, some of it dating back to 1850. We have a key which we believe belonged to Joseph Henry. It came from Princeton University. We have many early telegraph keys, relays, sounders, and stock tickers, all used on landline equipment. In this showcase, there are very early submarine cable keys and unusual types of landline instruments. The center showcase is one of the collectors. And here you can see the early Atwater Kent breadboard radio receivers, which are choice items for the collector. In the case at the left, one can see early electrical measuring equipment, very old and peculiar-looking meters, some of them dating back to the Civil War. There's much interest in these measuring instruments. Let us take a look now into the showcase in the center of the room. This case houses some of our very early commercial equipment. The lower shelf contains equipment that one would have found on board the Titanic when it sank in 1912. Starting at the left of the lower shelf is a Marconi magnetic detector of about 1910 vintage. Next to it, with the several white cards, is a 1907 multiple tuner made by the British Marconi Company. We believe it's one of the rarest pieces of Marconi equipment in North America. The multiple tuner and the magnetic detector make up the necessary pieces for a receiver of the Titanic period. To the right of the tuner is the famous Marconi 10-inch spark coil. In the middle of it are the 2 gaps. This coil was used on board ship over a period of about 30 years, from the turn of the century up to about 1930. In the later years, it was used as an auxiliary or emergency transmitter. The coil is a vibrator type with the vibrator on the end. Using 30 volts DC, it would run almost 500 watts. The piece of equipment at the far lower right is a British Marconi detector unit. With this, you have a choice of 4 mineral detectors or a Fleming valve. The Fleming valve can be seen. It is the vertical tube next to the side. On the top shelf at the right is a 1905 Marconi coherer, which is very rare. And to the left of it, on the top shelf with a card, is a replica of Marconi's coherer receiver like he used to demonstrate wireless in 1898. And at the far left, not seen too well, is a 1905 Telefunken coherer receiver. Here we're looking at another showcase which is full of tubes. Altogether, the association has approximately 7,000 tubes. We have quite a few in this display, and the most unique and rarest is in the bottom center of the showcase, a 1905 Fleming valve. We believe it's one of the oldest radio tubes in America. Keep in mind now that the Fleming valve preceded the DeForest Audion, and this particular tube, 1905, was made 1 year after the discovery of the valve by Fleming. It was given to the association by the British Marconi Company of England. This is a group of RCA transmitting tubes of the 800 series. Every tube number begins with 8, followed by 2 digits. And we display an 800 going right up to 899, a water-cooled tube rated at 100,000 watts. A very early commercial receiver is shown in this picture. It was used on board a ship, let's say about 1912, 1913. It's a very rare receiver made by Wireless Apparatus Company. The next slide shows another very early receiver. Note all the dials and knobs on it. This was made by the Canadian Marconi Company about 1914. It's a crystal set, I might add, and was used for transatlantic work. This is an exact replica of Major Armstrong's original regenerative receiver, which he made in 1912. He is credited with inventing or discovering regeneration. This replica, however, was made in 1922. His whole life was one of patent litigation and lawsuits. In 1922, he was asked to make an exact replica of what he had made in 1912. This receiver is the one he actually made personally in 1922 to bring into court. And this is what the first regenerative receiver looked like. On top is the DeForest Audion tube, which it used.